Boker Tov. It's Monday morning. I want to thank those of you who have shown concern and written messages back. I've been rather under the weather, very much under the weather, with COVID since last Monday night. And today is the first day I feel like a functioning human being again. So in my attempt to catch up on everything from last week, I'm recording last week's shiur on the first three parshiot of Shemot this morning. I will record in Yirtzeh Hashem the next one for B'Shalach on Thursday. I apologize. I know my speech is a bit labored, as breathing is a little bit of a challenge still, but I really want to do this before the moment passes. As you know, my husband and I were in Israel for almost 3 weeks, and it strikes me that as I'm speaking about when a people does become a nation, we actually saw so much of Am Yisrael, B'nai Yisrael as Am Yisrael, pulling together, caring for each other, caring about others, showing compassion for innocent victims in Gaza, pulling together to make a life for each other in Israel. Going beyond what we're seeing on the media, on social media especially, and having lived in the reality of what's going on for 3 weeks, I'm coming back with chizuk, with strength, with more of a centeredness and a confirmation that where I sit in terms of my love for Israel and compassion for all of human life, and feeling that the Israeli government needs to do better, and all of the complications of this issue, these educational programs that are teaching hatred and desire to destroy another people, that all of these things are existing in real time and impacting real people. I want to begin with an observation that was made by an amazing 17-year-old Israeli Arab Muslim student in the village of Kfar Manda, where my wonderful colleague Chaviva Ner David, and we really have to spend more time together, Chaviva, invited me to come and be present for her English class and have the kids interview us, my husband and myself, and us interview them and what have you. I met with 2 groups. One group were kind of typical teenagers on the phone, checking their nails, and shooting glances at each other, fist bumping, all that stuff. The second group was a much more serious group of 7 people. It was also a smaller group, which made a big difference. But we had a very dedicated conversation about their lives, what it's like to be Israeli Arab Muslims at this time. Kfar Manda is a village in the Lower Galilee. People that are there have lived there for generations. It's a very together community. It's a very solid community. It is a kind of nation within a nation, if you will. Beautiful homes, by the way. Clearly, there are people there that are doing quite well. And it was just lovely. So this one young man who was extremely articulate, and remember, English is probably his 3rd language, because Arabic being first, Hebrew being second, and English being third, was talking about how social media is horrible, and kids should not be exposed to it. And he said as follows: if I go by social media, then there are school shootings in all American schools. All Hispanics are gang members, all blacks are hoodlums, all Jews are occupiers, and all Arabs are terrorists. I am not going by social media. I don't listen. And I think words from one so young and so wise would resonate very well and is something to be taken into consideration by all of us. Where are we getting our information? How do we know what we know? Are we fact-checking? All of that. Israel has a right to be a nation. When I was in Israel, I bought this charm of Israel. And my husband says to me, aren't people going to see that as a political statement? And I said, no, it's not a political statement. It's an affirmation that this is a collection of people. There are Druze, there are Circassians, there are Arabs, there are Muslims, there are Christians, there are Druze, there are Bedouins, there are Jews, every possible, all kinds of Olim, those who've made Aliyah. And somehow this nation needs to function. And in many ways it does function, by the way. One of the most, I don't know if you would call it unsettling or disorienting factors of our time there was we elected to spend the entire time in Yerushalayim for a multitude of reasons. But we got to spend it with a lot of different people and hanging out with individuals on multiple occasions, which was really quite wonderful. And it is such a combination of people. It is such a potpourri. Somebody once said that if America is the melting pot, Israel is the cholent bowl. In other words, all the ingredients are there, but everything maintains its own taste, or a salad bowl. And when you maintain your own taste and your own history and your own background, then being a nation, being a collective on any level becomes much more difficult. And this is not a matter of Gaza and West Bank. This is a matter of, do you really want to divide it into all the different peoples that are there? Do we include the Bedouin camps? Do we include where the Druze are? Do we include, how many different divisions can we make here? Think of where you live. Think of where the state or the country that you identify with. How many different collectives are part of the overall collective? And this is what Israel has been. This is what Israel needs to be. And this is what I believe, personally, I statement, Israel and its government need to do a better job of. I will share more reflections as time goes on. I'm actually writing in a book that a friend of ours gave us. Thank you, Mark. And I really feel that, again, as I confront all of the dynamics here in the United States that just make me so depressed and want to just pull the covers over my head sometimes, I didn't feel like that at all. Not even once in Israel. I didn't. I was sad. I was upset. I talked to a lot of people who indicated that the protests that happened right before the war started are picking up again. I stood at a rally for the hostages and for all innocent souls. This is Israel. This is Israel. This little outline does not indicate any kind of exclusivity, but it includes all. It reflects inclusivity. That's what it is to me. During the last 3 weeks in Parshiot, Shemot, Vayera, and Bo, while reading about challenges of captivity in Mitzrayim and the various plagues of destruction that ultimately will facilitate the freedom of the Jewish group of slaves and define them as a nation, we see an incredible and notable transformation. Think for a moment about the divisiveness that continually followed the tribal groupings of B'nai Yisrael through Bereshit. And now, we will speak of them as a single and somewhat united entity. Are they? How does this happen? For a moment, yes. Go through the tragedy and the trauma of slavery, come out, there's a unification. Go through the tragedy and the trauma of October 7th, and you come out, and yes, there's a unification. But that does not erase all of the differences that have to be acknowledged in this nation. When does a people become a nation? How do we address what will continue to be divisive issues of disagreement as a nation? And again, I ask us all to think, and we have the reality check right in front of us in terms of October 7th, before and after. Let us look at the very beginning of our second book of our Torah, Parak Aleph, verses 8 through 12, in Shemot. Vayakam melech hadash al Mitzrayim, asher lo yada Yosef, vayomer el amo hinei am b'nei Yisrael rav atzu mimenu. A new king rises over Egypt who does not know about Yosef. He says to his people, behold, this group They are numerous. They are stronger than we. Hava, nit, chakma. Let us deal shrewdly with them. A very similar incantation to when the people in Parshat Noach go to build Migdal Bavel and say, we are going to rise above God. We're going to join together. We're going to shrewdly do something that will have us rise above all sources of accountability. Let us deal shrewdly with them. We don't want them to increase. We don't want a war to come and they will join others or they will leave. So they appointed tax collectors. What was their fear? Their fear was the numbers, the strength, and maybe some sense of unification. But much as they would afflict them, they continued to multiply. And so they gained strength. And the Egyptians were disgusted. V'chen yifrotz v'yekutzu mipnei B'nai Yisrael, because of the children of Israel. Rabbi Dov Lisner comments as follows. The opening of Shemot marks the transition from Jews as a family to a nation. It is thus shocking to realize that the first one to identify us as a nation is Pharaoh. What does it mean to be defined by those who hate us? By a history of oppression, by who opposes us, and by what and whom we oppose. How can we understand ourselves not just as a people, as an but rather as a kihila, a community with a shared vision and message? In other words, what Rabbi Lisner is asking us to consider is there's a difference when someone else looks inside and says this is who these people are. But then we affirm from the inside who we are. And Israel as a democracy, as well as a Jewish state, has the right, the responsibility, and the agency to do that. And that is one of the things that distinguishes Israel from all of the other countries in the Middle East. Someone else is telling them how they identify. That does not work in Israel. And that is why there are protests against the government on many levels. In my formative years, the notion of nation and nationalism were about being filled with pride and declaration of being. In other words, an identity from the inside. As one list of terms explains briefly, if a group of people has a shared sense of nationalism, then they form a nation. The idea of nationalism believes that once a group has defined itself as a nation, they have a natural right to territory necessary to live in and govern in. During those years, Israel was indeed a young nation in the conventional contemporary meaning of the word. However, in another source of definitions, we read as follows: a nation is a territory where all the people are led by the same government. The word nation can also refer to a group of people who share a history, traditions, culture, and often language, even if the group does not have a country of its own. That we had been for so many, many generations, and now a land, was to become part of the equation. The land that we read about in our Torah, the land in which the archaeological finds and documents uncovered reveal that this was indeed not a land, but the land, which God, the creator of all, as defined in the very beginning of the Torah, designated for us, this people. Today we often hear talk about the rights of indigenous people, which unfortunately, aside from everything else, too many people refuse to apply to Jews and the Jewish nation, also defined as democracy. Nationalism has become in our lives today a very negative word, referring to colonization and co-opting of people's rights and other such notions. This is what happens with stipulative definitions according to our science of linguistics. Zionism was incepted to reclaim the land originally bequeathed to this nation of B'nai Yisrael, just like so many other groupings have claimed to their land. But today, well, here we are. So what makes a nation? Is it a shared ancestry and narrative? Foundational values? Shared practices? Language? Culture? A shared sense of responsibility for each other? Kol Yisrael Erevim Zeh B'zeh? Pride in all of the above? Or is it shared trauma Think about that for a moment. Try to step out of the politics for just a moment and think about Palestinians who were disenfranchised from so many different places. Jews were disenfranchised from so many different places. And yet, people will respond to trauma differently and then hold others responsible for that trauma. And if you can sort of put your head inside of that for just a minute, you might be able to address some of the complexities that are real. And that does not, friends, that does not take away from my love for this land and this history and this people. I would contend that in thinking about a nation, we should begin with values. For this piece of the puzzle, let's look at chapter 2, verses 11 through 14 in our parshas. ויהי בימים ההם ויגדל משה, ויצא אחיו וירא בסובלותם, וירא איש מצרי מכה איש עברי מאחיו. ויפן כל וכל, וירא כי אין איש, וירא את המצרי, ויטמנהו בכל. Moshe's walking around. He sees an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man. Of his brothers, me'achiv, somehow he knows this. He turns this way, that way, he sees no one's looking. He strikes the Egyptian, hides him in the sand. He goes out on the second day, and behold, 2 Hebrew men are fighting each other. And he says to the one who has his hand raised, "Why are you going to strike your friend?" And he retorts, "Who made you a man, a prince, a judge over us?" And again, from their perspective, it would be Pharaoh, right? Do you plan to slay me as you did the Egyptian? Remember, we see something very interesting here. In the first case, Moshe recognizes that the positioning of the 2 quarreling is not equal, while in the second case it is. Further, remember, he is brought up as an Egyptian prince, but somehow understands what is wrong in the first instance in terms of power advantage. Aside from this, he is the Egyptian prince in the eyes of all who are working and supervising. So how do we explain his actions? A bit later in chapter 3, we see the most fundamental value and belief in all, that in the one and only one God. V'yar Hashem kisar larot v'yikra elav Elokim mitoch hasnei v'yomer Moshe Moshe v'yomer hineni. God sees that he turned to see, that he turned to look. And God calls him from within the thorn bush and says, "Moshe, Moshe." And he replies, "Hineni, here I am." And he says, "Don't come near. Take your shoes off because the place where you stand is holy." And then he says, "Anochi Hashem avicha, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, Yistar Moshe panav ki yarei mihabit el Elokim." God identifies himself. "I am the Lord of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, your fathers." And Moshe hides his face because he's afraid from looking at God. And God now says to Moshe, "I have seen the affliction of my people. I've heard their cry. I know their pains. I have come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians, to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I've also seen the oppression that Egypt is giving to them." He now says, "I'm going to send you to Pharaoh," and note his answer. "Vayomer Moshe Elokim, mi anochi, ki elecha Pharaoh v'chi yotzi et B'nai Yisrael miMitzrayim." Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and I should take the children out of Israel, the children of Israel out of Egypt? And God says, "I will be with you. I will stay with you." And Moshe says, "Look, I have come to the children of Israel. I have said God is sending me." And God says to Moshe when he asks, "Who should I say is sending me?" "Yeah, Sherry, yeah. I will be what I will be. And this you shall say to the children of Israel. All that I will be has sent me to you." How did he know this to be the truth, his truth? The Midrashim around him attest that Miriam, his sister, and Yocheved, his mother, were able to teach and guide him in his youngest years until he was weaned. This belief, which seems to be part of his personal core, more than anything else, is what defines and unites the Jewish nation. That being said, There are always other elements that are part of the equation. As Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Shalom, teaches, uniquely in Judaism, religion and nationhood coincide. There are nations with many religions. Multicultural Britain is one among many. There are religions governing many nations. Christianity and Islam are obvious examples. Only in the case of Judaism is there a one-on-one correlation between religion and nationhood. Without Judaism, there would be nothing except anti-Semitism to connect Jews across the world. Trauma, and we're seeing that today. And without the Jewish nation, Judaism would cease to be what it has always been, the faith of a people bound by a bond of collective responsibility to one another and to God. And in that responsibility to God, responsibility for taking care of and being concerned about all people. In Israel itself, Jews are a walking lexicon of almost every ethnicity and culture under the sun. What makes Jews a nation dwelling alone, not reckoned among the nations, is that their nationhood is not a matter of geography, politics, or ethnicity. It is a matter of religious vocation as God's covenant partners, summoned to be a living example of a nation amongst the nations, or like living amongst the nations, made distinctive by its faith and its way of life. Lose that, and we lose the one thing that was and remains the source of our singular contribution to the heritage of humankind. Perhaps this is to say that Jews and the Jewish nation are in fact different, and therefore defying description by others. Could this be the reason people are so fearful of the Jewish people and thus retreat to discriminating against Jews? How do we understand the continual litany of traumatic experiences that have befallen our nation throughout the generations and not become discouraged? This is difficult to absorb, both from the outside for those looking in, and is no less of a challenge for us as a people, as illustrated by the angst many of us feel when looking at our reality, and exemplified by one of the most important think tanks and institutions in Israel today, the Israel Democracy Institute. By the way, I highly recommend, if any of you have any doubts, that Israel is exclusive, that it doesn't care about others, that it doesn't acknowledge this dual nature of its identity, please go to their website, Israel Democracy Institute. It is dedicated to maintaining both the value-driven and Jewish-informed democracy that Israel is. We continue in our text from Parshat Vayera. God spoke to Moshe and said, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, with the name Almighty God. Ushmi Hashem lo nadati lahem. But my name, Adoshem, Yod Kei Vav Kei, was not known to them. I established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their sojournings in which they sojourned. And I heard the moans of Israel, and I said to the children of Israel, I am the Lord your God. I will take you out. I will take you to me as a people, and I will be God to you. You will know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from the burdens of the Egyptians. Trauma, refuah, redemption. Shared and established history contribute to the identity, and this will be the national reality of this people, of this as they witness the plagues in Parshiot Vayera and Bo, and the many generations of abuse and curious theories, now referred to as conspiracy theories. We also expose ourselves to the ramped-up anti-feelings to which we are subjected. History revisionists cite that Jews must be sorcerers because they did not die in the same numbers as others during the Black Plague. They never considered that observing laws of kashrut and cleanliness are part of the equation that saved these Jews. Those who claim that the Holocaust did not happen, or it should have happened because Jews are so suspicious, the misrepresentation of Jews through harmful caricatures and literature and so on, are as normative as any other dynamic in our history. Our haftarot for these three parshiot come from Yeshayahu, Yechezkel, and Yirmiyahu, kind of big three when you look at Parshiot and the Haftarot. In all three of these, challenges and threats to the very existence of our B'nai Yisrael are acknowledged, as well as our need for accountability. If we are to be masters of our own destiny on any level, as the nation we are accountable to God, we are accountable to our values, we are accountable to our history, to its lessons, to all those things that make us this nation. Yeshayahu speaks of the small that will spout forth, be hurt, and scourged. Then Yechezkel explains in chapters 27 to 28 that Israel will be gathered from the scattered corners to which it was sent, and there will be punishments for others. We read a few verses from Yechezkel. So says God, B'kiptzi et bet Yisrael min ha'amim, when I gather in the house of Israel from the peoples amongst whom they've been scattered, and I've been sanctified through them to other nations, then they will dwell on the land I gave to my servant, to Jacob. In other words, God, and these prophets are called the prophets of social justice. God is enjoining us to never stop caring about others, care about ourselves, work for ourselves, join together, remember you're a nation, and remember you're an Or Lagoyim. Remember that this does not absolve you from caring about others, as hard as that may be. When God brings us to the land, they will dwell upon it securely. They will build houses. They will plant vineyards. They will dwell. And God will execute judgments against those who plunder them from around. And again, V'yadau ki ani Hashem Elokechem. It all comes back to God. This is not self-serving. You know, one of the things that I've noted on Israel 24, which is where I get a lot of news, and just from being in Israel, is the screaming and the shouting and the yes, they say Allah Akbar and all of that. But the vitriol that I've seen by Hamas versus in Israel, everybody comes together to pray, to sing, to dance in solidarity in a very calm way. You don't see... Again, I was at one of those rallies and I watched a lot of the footage of different ones. You just don't see it. You don't see it. There's gratitude. There's caring. There's sadness for all death. This is repeated in Yirmiyahu, in its Haftarah companion to Parshat Bo. Fear not, O Yaakov, my servant, and be not dismayed, O Israel, for I will redeem you. Ki hineni moshiacha merachok ve'et zaracha me'aretz shviyam. I will redeem you from afar, and your children from the land of their captivity. Very apropos at this moment. And Yaakov shall return, and notice what it says, V'shav Yaakov v'shaket, shanan ve'ein macharit. Yaakov will return and be quiet and at ease, and none shall disturb his nest. Humility, anava, gratitude, hodot, thanks. God has done this. We are God's people. We need to continue to be as God's people. As I often say, we did not exit Mitzrayim to become Mitzrayim. We did not destroy Amalek to become Amalek. As hard as it is, and I know it's hard, I feel it, we have to do and we have to be better. Fear not, my servant Yaakov, says God. I'm with you. I will take care of you. I will exact retribution from those nations that have hurt you. But I will also chastise you. I will hold you responsible for your actions as well. Note the refrain of perspective, and remember that concept of rega katan, the moment, this moment in time, when confronted by trauma and profound challenges. Again, we return to the question, is this what defines us as a nation? The way that Pharaoh saw us? Or mashu acher, something else? Let us bring this to a close or a pause with a teaching of Jonathan Sacks. The B'nai Yisrael are indeed a nation that is bound by covenant to God. This is the repeated message of our prophets. We must follow God. We must follow God's dictates. This is what defines us as a nation. Rabbi Sacks teaches that the United States is the only other entity as a nation in the world bound by a covenant our Constitution. In fact, we are called. This is not political, and I'm not getting into the controversy, but we are called one nation under God. Something people may need to consider, just like Hatikva is a national anthem called Nefesh Yehudi. These are our anthems. In Hebrew, the words for the United States are Artzot Habrit, or the lands of the covenant. This should be our self-definition. We are a nation, proud, sharing values, reflecting history, having pride in our identity. This is our definition, not those inflicted on us by those who hate us or by social media. And that goes for all groups that are maligned on social media, going back to my 17-year-old amazing Arab Muslim student. And I do hope his teacher plays this for him so he hears this. Who would minimize us, who do not understand us. Stand tall. Reflect the best of who you are as individuals and as a collective. This is Am Yisrael, tested and scattered in the many instances of those regaim ketanim, and yet brought together by God, the one who created all, including our nation. Am Yisrael Chai, and may we all continue to work at being the best we can, we should, and we must be. Lihitraat.